How are you guys?
Good.
Good?
How are you?
Okay, I'm glad I have you first before you're like tired and everything. So I'm Lisa Schlosberg. I'm a personal trainer. I'm also a health coach. And the work that I do outside of school is really combining personal training and therapy. And so my goal after graduation is to have eventually like a private practice that does physical, personal training, and mental health talk therapy. So that's kind of what I'm about, and that's what we're gonna kind of get into. But that's me. Some of you, if you saw me speak last year at the Social Justice and Diversity Conference, some of this might sound familiar, but it is a completely different speech. And I don't do stuff like this, but last night I like scrapped most of what I had and created a new version of this because I had this gut feeling that it just like wasn't right. So I do have a bunch of notes here. If I need to look at them, just bear with me a little bit. But really, I want to thank you for being here. I know that you had other options and you could be listening to a bunch of different people speak right now. But it really does mean a lot to me that you're here. I love speaking about this. I think it's really important. And nothing, in my opinion, is more important than sharing this with people who are going into this field. So thank you, seriously, for coming. Okay, so first I want to just start with a brief activity. If you have a pen and paper, that works. If not, again, just kind of sit there and think about it. First, let's just like really quick take a deep breath. Drop your shoulders. One more. I want you to think about how you feel. Not how you feel physically, how you feel emotionally when I say the following. So you can write like number 2, number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever. Some of them might be really messed up. Some of them might be gut feelings you don't want to have. Some of them might be thoughts that you're uncomfortable with. You're not going to share them. This is just for you to be in touch with you. So be honest and true about what comes up. Number 1, how do you feel when you lose 10 pounds? You can write it, you can type it, you can think it, whatever it is. That's number 1. Number 2 is how do you feel when you gain 10 pounds? How do you feel when your friend loses weight and you don't? How do you feel when your friend gains weight? How do you feel when you look in the mirror? How do you feel when you see pictures of yourself? How do you feel when you notice stretch marks, cellulite, fat, anything on your own body that you don't like? Wrinkles, whatever else there is that you don't like. How do you feel when you want seconds, but you don't get them? How do you feel when you want seconds and you do get them? How do you feel when you don't eat for 5 hours? Good one. And how do you feel when you eat uncontrollably? So again, I'm not going to ask anyone to share these, but my goal here is to just get us in touch with the fact that these are all physical experiences. These are things that we go through, but they make us feel a certain way. And that there is no untying the knot between our mental and emotional experiences. So everyone's going to have a different list of different words. All of them are emotions. That's my point here. So just kind of hang on to that. I wanted to drop into just the theme, and then I'll get into me. So my story, this was in high school. And so I was morbidly obese my entire childhood, and I believed a lot of different things. I believe a lot of different things now as an almost therapist than I did back then, because growing up, I was the strong one. So being able to keep it together, especially when everything around me was falling apart, that was my ability. I was really good at, I can handle it, I don't need help, I'm strong enough to deal with this, it is what it is. So even when I was forced to go to therapy in high school, I was resentful, and I didn't understand what talking about anything is gonna do for me. I can handle it. I was adamant that my body and my weight had no connection at all to my stress and my emotions, and the fact that I was obese my whole childhood. I was a very left brain kind of person. So we don't know that much about the halves of the brain. I think this is an amazing picture because it really does explain it. So I was a left brain kind of person, meaning if I didn't see it, then I didn't believe in it. If there was no evidence or proof of it, then it didn't matter. And so that's how I felt about my feelings. My emotions weren't really important. I believed in willpower and control and strength. And I applied that same mentality to my weight loss. It didn't really matter how I felt about it. I didn't want to go on a diet to begin with. I was just going to power through it as fast as possible and move on with my life. But what I learned along the way is that the mind-body connection is not just some crazy idea made up by some spiritual guru like I thought it was. It really, I believe everyone that struggles with their weight, struggles with their body, and especially those who are going to help those who struggle with their weight and their body need to understand how this really works. So when we eat food, our brain releases dopamine and serotonin. These two neurotransmitters, combined with oxytocin and endorphins, are what chemists refer to as the happiness cocktail, because they activate what's called the mesolimbic, or reward pathway in the brain. So because human beings survive on food, we are designed to feel happy and rewarded when we eat it, and also to seek out a source of serotonin when our cortisol or stress is too high. So what I'm saying here is that when we're emotional, we are wired as human beings to seek out food. So this I put up here because I think it's really important all of us know just neurobiologically how cortisol works. All cortisol is the same. So it used to be this protective response mechanism if we were in the forest or wherever lions chase you or whatever. If a lion's coming after you, you get a rush of cortisol, you're in fight or flight, your heart rate rises, and you can flee, and it saves your life. So stress is ultimately a really good thing that helps protect us, but now everything is stressful. Our relationships, our jobs, our lives, our mortgage, our everything is stressful. Even our text messages are proven to shoot that cortisol. And so I think it's important we all understand that even if we look at someone and say, well, that's not really a stressful situation, all stress is the same. If it feels stressful, cortisol is flooding through your body. Similarly, I love that I found this. It says, technically the only two things you enjoy are serotonin and dopamine, because these work the same way. So it doesn't matter if you ace a test or get a high five or win the lottery. They're all the same neurotransmitters that are being released in your brain. And so because food influences our brain chemistry like every other addictive substance or pleasurable activity, and our brain is always playing this game of stress and stress relief by any means necessary, the real question is not, how do I stop eating? The real question is, why am I eating in the first place? What is the pain that I feel I need to numb? What am I trying to avoid? Why is my cortisol so high that I need to desperately bring it back down? So what I hope we walk away with today is understanding that any kind of issue with food is really the reaction. It's not the problem. It's the solution to a problem. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So again, I say my left brain was satisfied because there was actual statistical evidence. I think every social worker needs to know about this. The adverse childhood experience study proves that the more adverse childhood experiences someone has growing up, so a parent dying, being in prison, mental illness, abuse, neglect, etc., the higher their risk of health issues later in life. And so this was a really groundbreaking find in the field of addiction, because it started to answer the question, well, why is it most people who try most drugs are not addicted to them? And it proves that we have to stop looking at this adult and questioning their willpower and look at where they came from and what was going on in their immediate environment when their brain was neurobiologically developing to cope with stress. What source of happy chemicals were they conditioned to seek out at 3, 5, 10, 15 years old? And so this was really powerful for me to find out, because it's proven that if you kind of dig through the research a little bit more, obesity works the same way. It has the same exact statistics. And so when I looked at this, I thought, okay, well, it wasn't a lack of willpower every time I failed at a diet or Weight Watchers or another nutritionist or another dietitian, because my childhood was kind of spotted with all of them along the way. It wasn't a lack of willpower. It was that there was death, loss, grieving, trauma, mental illness, depression in my immediate environment, and that when I was 5 years old, my 2 primary caregivers were mourning the loss of a child. It wasn't a lack of willpower. I just didn't have drugs, alcohol, gambling, cigarettes, or anything else to keep me strong as a kid growing up. But I did have to eat food every day. So now, knowing all of this, I understand my weight loss in a very different way than I did while it was going on, because I knew at the time that I lost weight during my sophomore year of college, but that's because I was away from my stressful environment. I didn't need to protect myself from kind of the toxicity around me. And so I went on a diet physically, but psychologically what happened was I created a new reward system. Because every single time I ate a salad with no dressing, or I had dinner with no dessert, or I ate under 1,000 calories a day, it was reward. I was doing something good. I was right. And so now, instead of obesity being the one problem I had, I was really addressing it. And that's a constant reward, especially when you're overweight your whole life. So every indication that I was being smaller, so that's trying on clothes, interacting with people throughout the day, looking at myself in the mirror, anything that indicated I was being smaller, the fact that I could wear like hair ties on my wrist now, I could sit in an airplane, I could get into a booth in restaurants, it's everywhere. And all of them were indications to me that I was being better. I was more lovable this way, I was more worthy this way. And so the rapid weight loss, the joy and praise that is associated with rapid weight loss now became my source of happy chemicals. Mm-hmm. And now dieting, not eating, was the thing that made me feel good. And so on the surface, it looked like I was invested in my weight loss, but in reality, I had an addiction to it. And so I hope it's clear that first it was overeating, then it was undereating. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as that source of happy chemical is getting to you somehow. And so I use the word addiction because I'm highlighting the neurobiological, physiological, and psychological similarities between food and other addictions. But there is this pretty heated debate in the field of, is food an addiction or not? And even though there are reasons that food cannot be grouped with other addictions, for example, we can't treat it with abstinence, right? We all have to eat food every day. So there are reasons it's not like other addictions. However, I think that debate is completely missing the point. To me, even though the DSM today, as it is, even though we all know that's constantly changing and evolving, even though the DSM might not call it an addiction, to me, what I think we need to be concerned with is the fact that it's addictive. There are some qualities about food that are addictive in nature, and there are some tendencies humans have to act like addicts around food. It just is. And so I don't need the validation of the DSM. I think we have to really deal with the fact that this is a gray area, and that's what we're up against. So I like to say, if you're eating when you're not physically hungry, you're not responding to something physical. If your body is nourished and fueled and full, and you are still going for food, it doesn't mean your hunger is not real. It just means your hunger is not physical. And that's really important, is maybe it's not in your stomach hungry, but what is it that you're using food for? Because we're using it for something. And so I put all these other things up here that activate that reward center in our brain, because any of these things, not all, some of them are in the DSM, some of them are not, but the point is you can have an addictive use, misuse, use, overuse relationship with any of these. And so it's just worth, I think, understanding anything that makes you feel rewarded, noticed, good, any of that, it can become addictive, because it's not about the food, the substance, or the behavior specifically. It's about how the food, the substance, or the behavior makes us feel. And so I say, like, if table salt made us feel the way cocaine did, we would be doing lines of table salt. If tea made me feel the way coffee did, I would wake up with a craving for tea. It's not the food itself. It's what are we getting from the food. It's not the diet itself. It's what is the diet making us feel. So I think this can be really confusing for people who have never really struggled with their relationship to food. Like my supervisor right now, I think is hilarious because she's never had an emotional connection to food at all, and she needs me to really explain it to her, because I think it's kind of like cutting. And these are comorbid issues constantly, but something like cutting, if you look at it rationally, with logic, it's like, why does slicing your wrist make you feel better? I don't understand. It's kind of like this. Some people say, how could starving possibly make you feel good? It's not logic, it's emotion. And we have to understand this is not about what's going on the surface. How does it make them feel? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, moving on. And so recently, on that note, I did an activity with one of my clients, and so she's very stuck in this good food, good day, bad day kind of thing. And so when I asked her, well, how do you feel after a day of not eating anything? The day before, you ate too much, so today you don't eat anything. How does that make you feel? And her list was proud, accomplished, strong, powerful, pleased, pleasantly surprised, admirable, respectable. That's her list. And so again, it's not about, starvation doesn't make us feel good physically, but that is what she's doing it for. To feel proud, to feel strong, to feel good and empowered. And if it comes from starvation, that's where it comes from. Mm-hmm. So that is how I did this in a year. That's what my list would look like. If you said, what does not eating make you feel? Proud, accomplished, happy, strong. And that's what happened in a year. And so I hit a plateau after a year. I couldn't lose any more weight. And a nutritionist explained to me that my body had hit starvation mode. And it was now literally fighting me to keep weight on. And I was shocked because my whole life I was told eat less, exercise more. So I did. But she explained to me that I had eaten too little and exercised too much. And all of the doctors that I went to had no answers for me because losing my period and losing my hair, being dizzy, nauseous, fatigued, and freezing all the time, those were symptoms of daily starvation, not sickness. And I went to my doctor, my parents' doctor, an OBGYN, and an endocrinologist, and all of them said the same thing to me. This is the healthiest you've ever been. Look at your weight chart. Just maintain your weight and everything will come back. And so while we're on that note, 7% of registered physicians are trained in nutrition. Mm-hmm. They're trained in medicine. They don't know how to see. I remember an endocrinologist, he was like shining the flashlight in my eye, and I was telling him about the black spots that are like all over him. Mm-hmm. And he was like, well, if you feel so bad every day, how do you go to the gym every day? Mm-hmm. So now looking back, it's like, red flag, dude. Like, how did we not catch that? But they're not trained in that. And so that's another reason I think this is such a big deal. All these other medical professionals are not doing what we are doing. They're not going to catch the things that we can catch, even if you go to them asking for answers. But it had been, until now, the more that I could deny how I felt physically, the more weight I could lose. So the more reward there was. If I could deny my hunger and my exhaustion, the more successful I could be. So it had come naturally for me because I had spent my whole childhood kind of not feeling what I didn't want to feel and pretending that I didn't struggle. So I thought suffering was kind of the price I had to pay for having been so overweight. But by solving my weight issue, I had only created another. Instead of using food for reward, I was using starvation for reward. And luckily, again, for my left brain, this is actually a known phenomenon called addiction transfer. And if you type this into Google, the first two things you see are after bariatric surgery and after gastric bypass surgery. This is not random. Because like every diet, if we address the physical manifestation of an addictive relationship to food or dieting, we can get the weight off our body. But without addressing the psychological reason that behavior pattern exists in the first place, you will have to continue fighting to keep it off. Because like I like to say all the time, please feel free to steal this from me, we can't solve an emotional problem with a physical solution. So in May, I was told now I need to eat a little bit more, exercise a little bit less. And this was at a time, so I thought it was important to kind of really paint the picture of what it looks like for someone who's at this point in their life, if we have to help a client that's at this point. So I had an internship and I had the same schedule every single day that I would set the alarm, and if I sat in traffic on the way to the gym before work, I would calculate how many minutes I was in the car, which was how many minutes I wasn't on the Stairmaster, which is how many calories I wouldn't burn, which was whatever food I couldn't eat later in the day to make up for it. And it didn't really matter where I went, what I did, or who I was with. That was playing on repeat the whole day. There was nothing else that I was thinking about or concerned about or cared about, really. And so that was May, and then June and July. July was when I got sick. And it was just a few days, like 3 days in a row, where I woke up with a fever. I remember driving to work and like turning my head to switch lanes like hurt because my tonsils were so swollen. And it was the third day in a row that I got up and I took Advil and I went to the gym. And I remember getting off the Stairmaster, sitting in a pool of my own sweat, and I got down to like the mats because I was gonna do some stretches. And I remember feeling so sick. Every bone in my body ached. And I remember thinking, what am I doing here? What happened to me? Who am I? Like, what is going on? This is what an eating disorder looks like. And I have one. How did this happen? When did this happen? I'm not okay. And I refer to this as my like aha moment, because I didn't have an aha moment when it came to losing weight. There was no such thing as I have a problem I need to deal with. It was let me just get this weight off my body so I can move on and do whatever I want. This was, oh shit, I'm in deep and I don't know how this happened. And so it wasn't until then that I then called my therapist. And I remember she asked a little bit about my life. I told her every single second is accounted for, and I don't do anything other than track what I eat and go to the gym. And I remember her saying, "Are you happy?" And I was like, well, yeah, I'm happy, but I want to be carefree happy, not control freak happy. And so I explained to her, she said, okay. And the reason that I think this is so important for this audience is we were trying to figure out, okay, well, if your only source of happiness right now is coming from this little box that you're living in, we have to figure out how to like expand that. And so I remember her saying, you can still eat a salad with grilled chicken and no dressing, but do you think that you could do it at a restaurant, not in your apartment? And so to me, I thought, okay, well, I don't know what the chicken's being cooked in. I don't know what kind of oil they're using. I don't know how many calories that is. And it's just that whole spiral. But I thought, okay, this is as far as I can go. I'll do that. I will feel anxious about it. I'll be afraid, but I can go that far. And I remember her saying, you can still run 5 miles every morning, but do you think to start for a few days a week, you won't track it? And I was like, fine. I know give or take how many calories it is anyway. I think I could do a few days a week. Okay. And I include this because this, to me, I think about all the time. This is how you meet them where they are. This is what we have to do. Because she was the only person in my life at that point who wasn't saying, like, just eat a fucking cheeseburger. Or, like, who likes the gym anyway? Just don't go. That's what we have to do, is, like, collect the data on what their life looks like and what is one baby step we can get out of it. Because I swear to you, I don't know where I'd be if it wasn't addressed that way. So the real transformation began when I started to eat a little bit more and exercise a little bit less. Because without eating food to numb my pain or dieting to distract me from it, I had to actually feel it. And so my therapist likes to say that the floodgates were opened because now I was feeling everything all the time. And so a lot of addicts do have the same story. You can listen to a lot of people who drink for years, do drugs for years, and then they come out of it, and there's this kind of, I've heard the metaphor of like a blanket being lifted, like the thing that kept you really safe and warm and cozy is now gone, and you have to deal with that. Glennon Doyle, if you're interested in TED Talks, Glennon Doyle has a fabulous TED Talk called Lessons from the Mental Hospital, and she uses the metaphor of a cape. Her capes were alcoholism, drug abuse, and bulimia. And so when her capes came off, I love this quote so much, it is braver to be Clark Kent than it is to be Superman. Yeah, it's so good. So that's kind of how I related to that. That's what was going on now. And so everything from like turning on the news would make me cry because I finally felt sadness and fear and helplessness. And walking down the street made me feel exposed, and being one-on-one with people was scary and uncomfortable. And the fact that I now lived in a world that treated me like a completely different person didn't make me excited. It made me depressed. And I, at this point, despite everything that I argued growing up, my therapist was right all along. Life is so much harder without my shield of protection. And I really missed being 300 pounds when I didn't have to feel pain or vulnerability. And at this point, I remember going into therapy and I would just cry about the world, the way the world was, and homeless people and old people and war and injustice and poverty. And I realized at one point, nothing had actually changed. There were always old people and homeless people. There was always rain, and there was always things that were now making me cry. And I remember saying to my therapist, you knew that I would just lose all this weight and then I would become this psychological shit show. And she was like, yeah, of course I knew. And I was like, well, what the hell? And she was like, you had to learn it. You had to live this. You had to get here. Because again, I spent years in therapy where she would bring up my weight and I'd be like, you don't know what you're talking about. So she didn't. She just had to like wait for me to get there. And so I like this Superman in therapy because that nothing could be more accurate. That's kind of what it felt like, was I've been so strong all this time and now, holy shit, this is what people do. This is how people feel all the time. Yeah, so that what was going on there. And I really did think a lot about, well, how is it possible that at one point I was so happy and outgoing and spontaneous and fun? Like, where did she go? And what I realized is, I don't know that I was happy. I know that I denied feeling sadness. And I don't know that I was laid back and carefree. I was in denial of anxiety and helplessness and fear. And I was everybody's friend growing up, but as a defense mechanism. Mm-hmm. And so this revered personality that I had was really much more of a persona than it was a person. Mm. And now I found myself, my intention was to recover from starvation, but every time I tried to be a little less restrictive, I was out of control and eating too much. And I was just back and forth between eating way too much, dieting way too hard, eating way too much, dieting way too hard. And I was gradually more and more afraid of waking up at 300 pounds again because I really didn't know what was going on. And so I took a lot of this out here because I don't want the focus to be weight and weight maintenance. But two things are happening. One, our bodies are wired to binge after a restriction. It's a again, it goes back to a protective response mechanism. Our brains are going to do everything in their power to make sure we don't go through a famine again. When you're on a diet, your brain thinks you're in a famine, and then it eats a lot to protect you from never having to go through that again. That's the kind of elementary version of that. So that's what was going on in a physiological sense, but psychologically, food and dieting had both become reward. And so I was going back and forth between kind of both relationships. And I lived with an angel and a devil all the time. First it was eat less, exercise more, and then it was eat more, exercise less. And so every minute of every day became this battle between, what do? I don't know what's right anymore. And I remember saying to my mom, this is the least I've ever weighed and the least happy I've ever been. Because every second was a debate. And my entire life was now my body, my weight, and my size. And I wanted it back. I wanted my life back. And so I worked with my therapist. She explained to me there's a difference between health and weight. And now your goal has to be health, not weight. And so for someone who was overweight forever, that was like a mind-blowing idea. I thought losing weight was healthy. I thought health and weight were the same thing. But she kind of explained to me, health includes your social health, your mental, emotional, psychological health, your spiritual health. There are all these different things to consider than just your body. And that's what our kind of goal was. And so I made this list, this homemade list. So at a time where everything was numbers, calculations, tracking, portioning, weighing, calculating, my goal was, I just want to eat when I'm hungry and stop when I'm full. Why is that so hard? And that was my goal, was I'm ditching dieting completely. That obviously didn't work physically or mentally. And what I have to do is really get in touch with my feelings. And so I was skeptical at the time, but I started to meditate, visualize, do breathing exercises. Writing is always still a coping skill for me. Practicing gratitude, going outside, doing yoga, going to therapy, staying off the scale, and staying determined to be focused on long-term health versus immediate weight loss or weight gain or anything immediate. And over time, the only thing that could keep my weight stable was not dieting. That's important for everyone to know. The only thing that keeps weight stable is not going on a diet, first of all. Because instead of now using food or restriction as coping skills to deal with stress and emotion, these new mind-body techniques became my sources of stress relief. So I was still getting my happy chemicals just from healthier sources. And so it had been proven to me, by me, that my body is the effect, not the cause of my mental and emotional health. And if I feel my feelings, I don't eat them. And so again, I realized weight and health are not really about balancing calories in and out. It's about this psychological game of balancing my feelings and my stress relief. It's an invisible solution to a visible problem. We can put it that way. And over time, this mind-body connection really came back. And I remember there was one night, I was lying in bed with my boyfriend, and I was like, oh my God, Adam, I get it. I really get it. I understand. I can feel it. I really feel it. And he was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, so I was experiencing what some left brain chemistry people might refer to as chemical soup in our brains, manifest in me as a warm feeling in my chest. Love. And the more I challenged myself to be aware of what I was feeling, the more I noticed my feet are tapping when I'm anxious, and my jaw is clenched when I'm angry, and I hold my breath when I'm rushing or multitasking. And I actually began to feel fear, pain, sadness, anxiety, etc., instead of numbing them. And so over time, what I knew cognitively, left brain, it's time to eat, I'm not allowed to have that, that's too much, I have to work out, be strong, self-control, willpower, became overpowered by how I felt intuitively, right brain. I'm hungry, I'm full, I'm too tired to work out, I'm so stressed I have to work out, I need help, I can't, I love you. And what I learned is that if our relationship with food and dieting is emotional, which for many people it is, we can't be intuitive around hungry and full until our emotions are being dealt with in a way that is not food and dieting. Does that make sense?
Can you say that one more time?
Right? It's good. Yeah. Thank you. If our relationship with food, eating, dieting, etc., is emotional, which for many people it is, we can't be intuitive around hunger and fullness until our emotions are being dealt with in a way that is not eating or dieting. So now I'm gonna get a little bit more personal. Is that okay? Okay. So I thought that this was really interesting. And I haven't done this to an audience that is not other social workers. And I wanted to include this because I think you guys can get it in a way that most people don't get it. So my dad died in February. And so he was in hospice in our home for 2 weeks. And it's interesting for me now as someone who's been through that, by far the most traumatic experience I've had. But also someone who's studying social work, because I could almost make sense of what was going on in my brain. And so the first week that he was in hospice, I found myself at the gym in the same time and place as I was pretty much every day. And I remember looking in the mirror and hating everything. I hated everything that I saw. I was just a body full of things, of imperfections that needed to be fixed. And I had it in me. I mean, I've been in enough therapy at this point to kind of pause and say, well, this is kind of interesting, because I was just here last week and I didn't feel that way at all. So my body can't look that different. What is this really about? And I immediately thought, and tears were streaming down my face immediately, because I realized I'm turning to something that I can control, that I can critique, versus feeling the pain that I can't control. And I knew it. And then week 2, we had some hospice nurses come in and say it was a matter of days. Could be hours, could be days. And I don't know if any of you have ever been through that, but I say it was kind of like being in an airport when your flight is delayed for like 5 days, 6 days. You know it's gonna take off, but you don't know when, and you can't go anywhere because you gotta stay at the airport. And that's kind of what it felt like. And so I remember at this point realizing I can't eat. I'm hungry. I feel hunger. But the only thing worse than the only thing that could make this work is eating food. And so I knew it wasn't healthy. I knew it wasn't right. I knew that I was hungry and I should respond to that with food, but I couldn't get myself to eat. And so when I stop again and kind of go out of myself and think, well, what is this about? You know what to do and you're not doing it. Control. I had no control at all. The only ounce of control, of knowing, of certainty that it's going to be a matter of days, hours, there's nothing there for me to work with. The only thing that I could control at that point in my life was what I did or did not put into my body. And that's how this works. And so when I use the word addiction, I don't mean that we're always going to be struggling with food. What I mean is that if you go through a traumatic, stressful event, and at one point in your life, your coping mechanism was food, it will come up again. That's just what we're wired to do. It's the thing that brings our stress down. So when he died, instead of pretending that I was okay, like I got through my childhood doing, I remember feeling like a weight on my chest and tightness in my back and a pit in my stomach and fatigue all over my body, because instead of numbing it, I was feeling it. And I think what we experience sometimes is our clients, but also us, we're really not that different than they are, is this feeling that I don't want to go there because if I go there, I might never come back. If I open the can of worms, it might never close. If I start crying, I'll never stop. And so I had this moment. He died on February 2nd. My birthday was on March 25th. And I was getting really overwhelmed with sadness, grief, anger, a lot of anger. And I went into my basement and I took a 15-pound medicine ball and I just slammed it into the ground over and over and over again. And when I couldn't breathe anymore, I just sat there and sobbed. And then when I caught my breath, I took the ball and I slammed it over and over and over again. And then when I couldn't breathe, I just sat there and sobbed. And I just went back and forth for a while. And I remember thinking, I'm gonna die here. Nothing could possibly be so painful, but not fatal. And then something really miraculous happened when nothing happened. And I realized, I'm here. I'm still here. I'm still intact. And that wave of emotion subsided for now. And so if I didn't know what I know now about mental health, I would be on my way to 300 pounds again, no doubt. But what I know now is that your emotions can't kill you. But if you turn to food or dieting for comfort, safety, power, pleasure, reward, connection, love, etc., they will influence your relationship with food. Because it's not this. It's not what the world makes it out to be. It's not all of these things on the physical plane of your life. It's really this. And I think the best thing that we can do for our clients is explain this, is that it's all of these things that have to do with your relationship to food. Yeah. And so again, I think it's just our job to ask, not what's wrong with them. Why can't they just stop eating? Why can't you just stop dieting? What happened to them? And really quickly, I have two client examples. One from last year. He was being pressured into weight loss surgery, and he had lost 170 pounds and then gained it back plus some, which is what happens to 98% of people who go on a diet. So I asked him, well, how do you feel having all this weight back on your body? And he was like tired and lethargic and angry. And I was like, okay, what might be some of the good things about having this weight on your body? And he was like, well, people really don't mess with you as much. And I was like, oh, so safety, protection? And he was like, yeah, I really have a lot of those issues too. And I was like, what do you mean by that? He was like, well, with being adopted and everything. And so I said to him, listen, I'm not going to tell you what to do about surgery, but if that's an emotional problem, do you think you can solve it with a physical solution? And he was like, well, I really never thought of it that way. Most people are not thinking of it that way. They're just not. I had another client at the gym I worked at, and he came to me probably over 300 pounds, and he had been at all these dietitians, nutritionists, personal trainers were like yelling at him for not keeping the weight off. And I asked him something that no one had asked him before. When did the weight gain begin? Ask all your clients who struggle with any of this, when did it begin? It's not out of nowhere. And he said to me, this guy who worked for the fire department, after 9/11, when 6 of his friends passed away. And then he goes to a dietitian or nutritionist and they're yelling at him. This is how the rest of the world works. And so it's a reaction to something. It is a solution, not a problem. It is completely normal and adaptive behaviors. It's serving a purpose and it's coping. that's what I hope we can walk away with. And again, if the biggest problem you have with food is that you're an emotional eater, that's not a problem you have with food. That's a question about how you're coping with your emotions. And that's where we come in, obviously. So I had a couple more slides on here, but I really do basically, I'm gonna skip this. That's me at 8 years old. Basically, this idea that there is this new approach, and I interned with the specialist in childhood obesity in Southern California, and this is how she treats her clients. And so when I was sitting with her, talking to an 8-year-old, and hearing her say things like, I think the reason that you might be eating so much at night is because you're being bullied in school, and that sometimes eating makes us feel better. No shame, no blame, no guilt, no regret. And I thought back to me at 8 years old and all the shame, guilt, blame, and regret that I carried to the pediatrician every year. I know I'm a failure. Can we just get this over with? And so really there is another way to do this. And it's a better, healthier, happier way to do this. And it's new, but it is emerging. There is a reason, by the way, that Weight Watchers just changed its name and partnered with a meditation app. So don't wait for mass everything else. And it's up to us. This is an emotional, psychological experience, and the rest of the medical fields, the other professionals, are not addressing it the way that we, as social workers, as therapists, as mental health professionals, can address it. So I like to think of us as like the kind of front line of defense, and we can change this. We can change the way that this is viewed and talked about and treated in the field. So thank you so much for being here and listening, and yeah, seriously, thank you.